speakers. But at the end of each session, at the end of each lecture, each of you will have an opportunity to ask questions. There will be a question and answers session after each talk. Please write your questions in the chat box. If you've not registered yet, please, when you ask questions, please state your full name and details in the chat box when you send the questions. Today's webinar will be approximately 2 hours long. Each speaker will have approximately 30 minutes to present their lecture, and this will be followed by the questions and answers session. Our first speaker is Dr. Afroz Al-Haq. He is former Dean of the School of Interdisciplinary Sciences and Technology at the Department of Food Technology at Jamia Hamdard University in India, in Delhi. Dr. Afroz has been working in before the Hamdard University. He worked as a director of research and development at the Gulf Diagnostic Center Hospital in Abu Dhabi. He's a pioneer in vitamin D research and testing in UAE. And he's actually the founding president and chairman of the International Conference on Vitamin D Deficiency, Nutrition, and Human Health for the last 7 years. Professor Haq has more than 30 years of experience in basic and clinical research, and has worked in numerous places around the world, including the Pasteur Institute in France, McGill University in Canada, and he was telling me earlier on that in King Faisal Specialist Hospital and Research Center in Riyadh. He has also worked in the UAE, in Mafraq Hospital in Abu Dhabi, and also he was a professor at Dubai Medical College for Girls. Dr. Afroz will today present his talk on enhancing immunity by using vitamin D in COVID-19 infection. Dr. Afroz, thank you very much for accepting the invitation. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for such a nice introduction. And I will start. Let me, yes. Is it, can you?
Yes, we can see it. We can see your presentation and we can hear you.
Okay, so I can, yeah. So now the topic is the role of vitamin D in enhancing the immunity against COVID-19. Okay. There are two questions comes in mind when we talk about the vitamin D and COVID-19. The first question is, what is the link between vitamin D and COVID-19? And the second question is, can vitamin D protect us from COVID-19? And all this we will discuss in this presentation. This slide is showing the sources of vitamin D from where we are getting. Actually, as you know, sun is the key source of vitamin D, from where 90% of vitamin D is coming to us. And unfortunately, there is no food and vegetables rich in vitamin D except certain seafoods like swordfish and salmon fish, etc. But there are items which are fortified with vitamin D, like milk and orange juice and yogurt. Okay, so you can get vitamin D from. I will show you. This is a slide which is showing the metabolism of vitamin D. You will not find this kind of information in any textbook or any publication. This is based upon the information available about the metabolism. I prepared this myself, and published in 2009. Then I modified it again and published in 2015. So this is showing the classical pathways, endocrine pathways of vitamin D, and also paracrine or intracrine pathways. It will show you all about the metabolism and how it enters the bones, where it is metabolized in different parts of the body. So let us start from the left-hand side, top left-hand of this slide, with the different kind of rays coming to us. There are three important rays that we are talking about, that is ultraviolet A radiation, ultraviolet B radiation, and ultraviolet C radiation, ABC rays coming from the sun. UVA and UVB rays are hitting us. But as far as the ultraviolet C rays are concerned, they never come to us and they don't interact with Earth or humans or anybody living on Earth, because they are dangerous rays, and it is a natural control that they are absorbed in the ozone layer, which is a cushion between us and the universe. So let us talk about the remaining two rays, that is UVA and UVB. Between these two, UVB are the main rays which are interacting with our skin, and in the skin there is a precursor of cholesterol that is called 7-DHC present in our skin, and UVB rays interacting with 7-DHC, making pre-vitamin D after isomeric formation of vitamin D within 72 hours or such time. After making this vitamin D, it binds to the vitamin D binding protein. You can see here the arrow. First arrow from the sun, second arrow you can see here, it is binding to the vitamin D binding protein and entering into the liver of vitamin D takes place in the presence of an enzyme which is called 25 hydroxylase enzyme, metabolism of vitamin D, converting it into 25, which is the marker or the storage form of vitamin D. This is the form of vitamin D we measure in the labs. And it is the marker of the status of the protein in a person, whether deficient, sufficient, or toxic. From the circulation, it travels further to the kidneys. Second hydroxylation or the metabolism takes place. Another enzyme which is called 1-alpha hydroxylase enzyme, converting 25 OHD into 125 dihydroxy vitamin D or the calcitriol. So vitamin D, which is traveling to the cells and organs of the body, like skin, prostate, brain, pancreas, adipose tissues, skeletal muscle, heart, colon, monocytes, macrophages, lymphocytes, and other cells of the body. And it is metabolizing in the same fashion as it is, because all the material needed to metabolize, that is enzyme, which is also present in the cells and tissues of the body. And vitamin D coming out of intracrine pathways is responsible for immunomodulation, autoimmune diseases, gene transcription, cardiovascular diseases, and cancer prevention. Okay. Now, I would also like to add here that most of the research nowadays is concentrated on this part of the pathway of vitamin D. That is coming out of kidneys, responsible for the taking of the bones and bone health. But here it is other non-skeletal disease taking care. This is the remaining part that I didn't explain now. Here, see here, the yellow circle. Also, to take vitamin D from the oral route, you can eat the fish, you can take supplemental vitamin D in the form of tablets, capsules, and fortified milk or curd or any juice or anything. Here, by oral route, you can take both types, D3 and D2, both, and they bind to the chylomicrons and then travels to the liver where the hydroxylation takes place. And the rest of the story goes the same way as before I explained. Now, the next slide. Here you can see this slide I took from Professor Michael Hollick. he published in 2011, and this is beautifully showed that causes and consequences of vitamin D deficiency. The left part of this picture is showing that how we can get the vitamin D deficiency. What are the reasons of vitamin D deficiency? Sunscreen, your skin color, melanin, latitude, how far you are from the equator, seasonal variation, winter, summer, okay? And there are certain diseases which are responsible for vitamin D deficiency, and there are certain medications as well. Here now coming to the right-hand side of this picture, that consequences. What are the consequences? Vitamin D is involved from all the ailments of the body, diseases from head to toe. But mainly today we are concerned about its role in infection, upper respiratory tract infections, lung diseases, acute respiratory distress syndrome, asthma and wheezing disease, and etc. Okay. This slide shows taken from the guidelines of Government of India showing information about COVID-19, the symptoms that we can have: dry cough, high fever, sore throat, difficulty in breathing. These are the symptoms, how it spreads: air by cough or sneeze, personal contact, contaminated objects, mass gathering, okay, and prevention. By wash your hands. Sick people, always cover your cough or sneeze. Now, the immunomodulatory actions of the active form of vitamin D against respiratory viruses. I am showing here 3 viruses, that is rhinovirus, RSV, and influenza virus. All 3 are the respiratory viruses that is affecting the respiratory epithelial cells. Now, there are 2 scenarios, basal conditions, when there is no treatment, and in rhinovirus infection, there is a cascade of cytokines excreted or released, 8 and 10, and in RSV, there is the virus is translocation and on beta and 6 released. And also in influenza virus, number of cytokines, that is cytokine storm, that is released, the tumor necrosis factor alpha, interferon beta. When it is treated by vitamin D, active form of vitamin D, then these cytokines completely block. In all the 3 viruses, there is a recruitment of neutrophils, macrophages, and T cells, which are helping effector mechanism for viral clearance. Here in the RSV, dampen pathology, completely reversing. And there is release of LL37 and human beta defensin, and LL37 is a peptide that is cathelicidin, 37 amino acids, which is antiviral effects and viral replication going down, infectivity goes down, epithelial cell death goes down, and neutralization goes up. And the same in influenza virus, the cytokine storm is completely blocked and dampen immunopathology. All these cytokines is go down, or their expression is no more there. So high levels of pro-inflammatory cytokines or cytokine storm may lead to shock and tissue damage in the heart, liver, kidneys, and the lung, as well as respiratory failure or multiple organ failure, which is going on in the COVID patients, and ultimately death. Here in a normal conditions, vitamin D is in the cell, bind to its receptor. After binding to, all the effects and its actions come into force after binding of vitamin D, its active form vitamin D, to its receptor, that is VDR. It is now entering into the nucleus of the cell. Transcription takes place in the nucleus, and then it is controlling the immune cells like Th1, Th17, which are responsible for these cytokines: IL-2, interferon gamma, tumor necrosis factor alpha, 17 and 21. All are going down. Okay, their expression or release is controlled by vitamin D. And the T regulatory cells and Th2 cells, they are responsible for the cytokines IL-4, IL-10, TGF-beta, IL-5, 10, and they go up. Similarly, in the B cells, it is very well controlling down regulating the differentiation, IgG production, and proliferation. While the apoptosis, the programmed cell death, goes up. And natural killer cells, IL-4 goes up, interferon gamma goes down. In macrophages, these are the cytokines which are specific to macrophages. This is the first line of defense, macrophage, and these cytokines are released, which are down-regulated by vitamin D. IL-6, IL-8, IL-12, IL-1, phagocytosis goes up, cathelicidin it goes up, and toll-like receptor 2 and 4, they go down. These toll-like receptors, these are the membrane proteins which help the infection or a virus into the cell. And now dendritic cell, this is antigen presenting cells, and also the same way down-regulated, and anti-inflammatory cytokines upregulated. You can see right-hand side, the Italian deaths. Have you seen that in Italy there was plenty of deaths were going on every night in Italy when there was peak, and they did a study and found that IL-6 in those Italian death outcome in patients with severe acute respiratory distress syndrome. IL-6 was also an early indicator of cytokine storm-like condition. Now this is the cytokine storm. When the cytokines alerting the immune system become too abundant, the reaction may not be able to stop itself. All fall under the umbrella term cytokine storm. Cytokines rampage through the bloodstream. Now, as you know, there are two COVID-19 infections, immune cells and cytokines involved in innate and adaptive immunity. These two immunities are innate immunity and adaptive. Innate immunity, the first line of defense, and adaptive is second line of defense. Okay, so these are the cytokines here shown, the cytokines, pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory cytokines, which are released in both kinds of immune responses. And vitamin D promotes an anti-inflammatory response and suppress pro-inflammatory response. Enhance chemotaxis, antimicrobial peptides, and macrophage differentiation. Inhibit dendritic cell maturation, Th1 and Th17, and differentiation. Vitamin D, in a way, acts as a magic bullet in modulating the adaptive immunity. Okay. Now I was talking about antimicrobial peptide. These are cathelicidins and defensins. When the virus is entering into the lungs and vitamin D is in sufficient amount, then it releases antimicrobial peptide, which dissolves the membrane of the virus and kills the bacterial wall or the wall of the virus. Kills virus, kills bacteria, and blocks the acute respiratory distress syndrome, both defensins and cathelicidins. Now, this is vitamin D deficiency. When this is all about vitamin D present in sufficient amount. But when there is deficiency, it is responsible for renin to go up, ACE to go up, angiotensin 2 go up, ACE 2 go down, and which is affecting the lung injury. That is acute lung injury, ALI, and susceptible to infection. Because of this, goes pressures, the systolic and diastolic go up. And also the smooth muscle calcification goes up, cardiovascular disease go up, and insulin receptors go down, insulin sensitivity go down, insulin resistance go up, and beta cell are destroyed. Hypertension, also both ACE2 and hypertension severe, two-stage severity of increase the severity, while vitamin D reduces dysregulated expression of ACE, ACE2, angiotensin angiotensin 2 and angiotensin 1 to 7, leading cause of acute lung injury. Vitamin D supplementation induces ACE2 expression, which limits the information or formation of angiotensin 2 via ACE and reduces lung injury and protective role against COVID-19. Now this slide shows a study was done in New York based on in a hospital on 5,700 patients, and they studied the comorbidities, the factors involved in patients other than the coronavirus disease, like hypertension, obesity, and then 88% of the patients were having more than one comorbidity. And when they further differentiated, they found that hypertension is number one, 53.1% patients suffering from hypertension. Obesity, next, diabetes, morbid obesity, coronary artery disease, asthma, and so on. So the black people and others with darker skin pigmentation tend to have more melanin, which reduces the body's ability to produce vitamin D. Older people's thinning skin is less deficient at absorbing vitamin D, and those who spend more time indoors have less time under the sun, ultraviolet rays. So two kind of the patients were having the maximum deaths or died because of the coronavirus, the dark and the obese. So why does COVID-19 disproportionately affect older people? The hallmarks of aging likely contribute to the increased pathophysiological response to SARS-CoV-2 among older adults. You can see here is cell, membrane, endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi, extracellular matrix, senescence, inflammation, genome stability, and so on. The interaction between SARS-CoV-2 with the cell structures, it is showing here. The entire cell fitness is required to combat the viral infection. If there is no complete fitness of the cell, okay, then you cannot fight, or the patient cannot fight against SARS-CoV-2 properly. Normal aging includes changes at the cell, tissue, and organ levels, hallmarks of aging that are known to contribute to morbidity, frailty, and mortality in the aging population. Innate immunity with cytokine storm, so coagulopathy, neutralizing antibodies, cellular immune response such as CD4, CD8 plus T cells, B cells, NK cells, monocytes, macrophages, and T inflammatory and inflammatory host responses, along with specific virus antigens, epitopes, all have interactive roles in disease development. Applications of candidate anti-aging drugs such as rapamycin and metformin, and antiviral drugs with potential senolytic effects possibly boost the immune system of older adults. Now this slide is showing a condition when there is a vitamin D level normal in young population, and in the second scenario in the older adults when coronavirus. So young adults, there is inflammatory cytokines production because of vitamin D is helping in this infection, and there is some pro-inflammatory, but very few, but majority of here you can see in the green circles, felicitins are produced because of the vitamin D. In the second scenario, when vitamin D levels are not enough in elderly population, then at the end, there is a huge production of pro-inflammatory cytokines, very few antimicrobial peptides, okay, and very few anti-inflammatory cytokines. So the cytokine storms takes place. Following exposure to COVID-19, vitamin D content increasing intracellular reactive oxygen species production, suppressing NF-kappa B, nuclear factor kappa B, and P38 mitogen activated protein kinase expression. In contrast, vitamin D deficiency in elder in elderly leads to MAP and ROS and FKB pathways in the immune cells. So elderly with severe COVID-19 infection cannot turn off their pro-inflammatory immune mechanism, and therefore cytokine storm takes place. Here it is showing disrupted immunological responses in elderly with severe COVID-19 infection. You can see in the left top is a alveolar space, which is a sac which is responsible for exchange of oxygen to carbon dioxide and providing oxygen to the healthy cells. You can see many kind of cells are present there. COVID-19 particles and antigen presenting cells, macrophages, monocytes, pro-inflammatory, anti-inflammatory cytokines, and so on. So what happens that it is in the elderly population decreased expression of ACE2 and decreased autophagy and mitophages and decreased antioxidant capacity, vitamin D deficiency, and so on. So it is ultimately pro-inflammatory cytokines, interferon gamma, IL-1, IL-12, and necrosis alpha. They are expressed and produced. Anti-inflammatory cytokines, TGF-beta, in very little amount. An elderly patient with severe COVID-19 infection cannot shut down their pro-inflammatory immune before a cytokine storm takes place. The aging. Aging, what happens in the aging? Alteration of ACE2 receptor, excess production of reactive oxygen species, senescent adipocyte cells, alterations of autophagy, immune senescence, a continued defense of the body, vitamin D deficiency in older adults, okay, because of thinning of the skin and absorption of the UVB rays and so on. And it all together leads to inflamed aging, okay? And now I'm showing you a paper that we recently published in BMJ. All the researchers all over the world working in vitamin D, they decided that we should put something together. The ideas that there is a very important role of vitamin D in COVID-19 infection. So there is a 20-fold greater in vitamin D deficient. That is African American olders, institutionalized and obese are at a greater risk of vitamin D deficiency. Okay. Now the next slide, it will be show you that this is the slide showing 24 blacks, Asian, minority, ethnic doctors who died from COVID-19 infection, okay, in the UK. And they are supposed to be the vitamin D deficients because of the melanin and skin color. So they are not used to be there, but they are living in UK, but they are migrated from countries where there is sun throughout the year. So there is much evidence to indicate that vitamin D deficiency is responsible for the high incidence of BME COVID-19 deaths. Okay. Now this slide shows that since the discovery of vitamin D in 1922, here you can see it was discovered in 1922. In 30, it was decided that there is a need of fortification of vitamin D to everybody. So because there is a lot of rickets and osteomalacia, osteoporosis, these kind of diseases very much there. So it was decided that there should be a fortification of vitamin D. And from 1932, this exercise was followed. And during this period, there was no pandemic at all. But before and after that, there was pandemic. Time to time in 1822, Spanish flu, Russian flu, swine flu, and so on. Okay, there is a Philippines are supposed to be more than 75 nanomole per liter of the disease percent outcomes category by vitamin D status. And this one, when the levels were insufficient. This is deficient, insufficient, and sufficient. In both these categories, there were severe and critical symptoms of the disease in patients. Okay. This is a study was carried out in Indonesia, and they showed the levels of correlation with COVID-19 death rate with vitamin D levels. Okay. So as the vitamin D levels the disease go. This is the same study, and they in the Indonesia they asked all patients found positive for COVID-19 to go in the field and exposed to the sun, and maximum parts of the body is exposed to the sun rays, and they are getting maximum vitamin D from the sun. Okay, here this is a European UK fever patient died when more vitamin D from the sun. Okay, coronavirus patient dying each day in England fell from 6% to 1.5% between April and June. You can see here, and it is directly proportional. It is inversely proportional, the death rate to the vitamin D levels. As the vitamin D levels are increasing, the deaths are going down. Okay, here this is the mortality from Indian subcontinent. It is also showing that Sri Lanka is just at 8° north latitude, is a very, very low death rate here, increasing with the latitude here. Okay. This is a slide which was prepared on 28th of June. There were 544,615 confirmed cases of coronavirus. Okay, and 38.3% were infected. 3%, 16,434 deaths, and recovered 58%. Now, the numbers are changing every day, every minute. So this is the today's information that I got this morning. Confirmed 605. During the last 5 days, 100,000 of patients added. Now it is 605,216, infected 227,477, deaths 5%, and recovered 95%. Okay. Now the important thing in this graph is that patient numbers are increasing, but the recovery to death ratio has improved dramatically since the mid-March when the outbreak took place in India. It was 1:1 at the start, but it is now 30:1. Okay, here you can see here 30:1. Here, then this is a new coronavirus is in the US. Now the peak came here in April 1st. You can see April 5 around here. April there was in Europe and US. First peak has came. Europe is going down. There is no peak, but in the US there is second peak is coming here. Very alarming and disturbing. What is happening? Okay. This slide is showing that there are 18 clinical trials going around the world using different vitamin D doses and their mode of delivery in different countries, in Brazil, Spain, Iran, US, France, Spain, and so on. Okay. But all this, what is happening, vitamin D is ready all to attack the coronavirus. Key takeaway messages: vitamin D deficiency is associated with respiratory disease, acute respiratory distress syndrome. Vitamin D regulates both innate and adaptive immune mechanism to contain the virus, lower the replication, and reduces pro-inflammatory cytokines, along with reduction induction of anti-inflammatory cytokines. Vitamin D can reduce the production of cytokine storm. The antimicrobial peptide LL37 and human P defensins have antiviral properties and reducing disease severity and viral replication and inhibiting the infectivity. Since vitamin D insufficiency viable means to fight COVID-19. Trump was talking about that treat the patient with the bleach. Okay, it's funny. And these are, vitamin D will not prevent a patient from contracting the virus, but it may reduce complications and prevent deaths in those who are infected. Professor Vadim Beckman from the USA. It is scary, it is unprecedented. World will never be the same again, I think. And thank you very much for your time and attention.
Dr. Afroz, thank you very much for this enlightening talk. Unfortunately, we're running a little bit late on time. We will have one question, if we may. Let me have a look and see if there's anybody who's in terms of questions. We'll take one question from the chat box. Is there any, you're saying that vitamin D.
Can you see me?
Yes, well, I can, yes.
But my screen is not showing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's better, yeah.
Yeah, it's okay now.
Okay. One question, that is, if the vitamin D is important in terms of infections and you're correlating vitamin D with COVID, do we also see higher level of other respiratory infections like RSV and like influenza you mentioned earlier on? Is there a correlation? Do we actually see those viruses increase in the incidence of these respiratory viruses also?
Yeah, actually, I showed one slide that RSV and influenza virus, and
now
there is a group in
the question, Dr. Afroz, the question is, in COVID-19, do we also see a rise in those secondary, not only COVID-19, but also other respiratory infections? In
yes.
COVID-19 patients, do we also see secondary infection with, for example, bacterial infections or viral infections, increased level?
Yes, because when we say that vitamin D is inducing the expression of cathelicidins and defensins, and these both are antiviral and antibacterial, because when there is an infection takes place of the virus in the lungs, it is not only the virus, but there is bacterial infection as well. So both these molecules are working against these infections.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Afroz. Again, because of limited time, we have to move on to the next speaker.
Yeah, pleasure, Dr. Khan. Nice.
Thank you very much. Stay online. Perhaps if after the sessions, if we have time, then we can refer more questions to you. Our next speaker is Dr. Layla Abdul Warith. Dr. Layla is the Deputy Chief Executive Officer and Chief Scientific Officer at the National Reference Laboratory in Abu Dhabi. Dr. Layla is a board certified pathologist and physician with a special interest in capacity building, quality assurance, and healthcare administration. Dr. Layla previously worked in the British Columbia Children's and Women's Hospital in Vancouver. Vancouver is a beautiful place. She joined Mafraq Hospital in Abu Dhabi as the head of research and specialized testing laboratory and deputy chief medical officer, and then as chair of pathology and laboratory medicine at the institute in Khalifa Medical City. Dr. Layla then served as the chief medical officer for laboratory medicine services at Saha, followed by her appointment as chair of pathology at the Pathology and Laboratory Medicine Institute at Cleveland Clinic. and finally as the Deputy CEO and Chief Medical Officer at the National Reference Laboratory. She's an active member of various societies and recipient of several awards, including the Dr. Arthur Bloomfield Award for Excellence in Medical Education and the Sheikh Rashid Award for Scientific Excellence. Dr. Layla, thank you very much for joining us. Dr. Layla will be talking about how to test for COVID-19 in the pathology lab. Dr. Layla, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your kind introduction. Thank you very much, kind invitation. Let me see if I can share screen. Perfect. Can you see slides all right now?
Yeah, it's okay, Dr. Layla.
Perfect. Thank you. So it's a pleasure really to be here and with my dear colleague, Dr. Afrouz, and also Dr. Jihad with us as well, discuss a very important topic that we're discussing which is COVID-19.
Can I please ask everybody to mute their phones, please? Please mute your phones except Dr. Layla.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll talk a little bit about this of the virus, and then in broad terms, the classification of tests that are available for us to diagnose SARS-CoV-2 infection, which is basically the PCR and serology. And I will try to quickly go over the pros and cons of each of them. So the virus itself is a beta chorus subgenus virus. It's a stranded RNA virus, and the RNA of that virus is kind of packaged or covered by this nucleic acid. The viral RNA capsid is then embraced with this lipid envelope. And then this lipid has several proteins. The very important one is the spike protein, which is an protein for the entry of the virus inside the host. Also have the protein, and we also have the membrane. So these are things to